Okay, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Carl Hillier. I'm the head of product marketing here at Ephesoft, and the purpose of this webinar is to provide information relating specifically to Ephesoft Transact 2019.1 and also introduce the Cloud HyperExtender. So the agenda of this webinar is, first of all, we're going to talk about the changes that we've made to our software release cadence, shifting to a quarterly release cadence. Now, there are obviously some ramifications of doing this, and we'll get into that specifically around the end-of-life version support policy now that we're moving away from major and minor releases. We'll then get into details on Transact 2019.1, and at the end of the webinar, we'll introduce the new Cloud HyperExtender capability. And talk a lot about that in terms of how that can transform the performance of a Transact system. Okay, so let's look at the release cadence first. So as I mentioned, we're moving away from the traditional kind of major minor release model. And there are some discrete benefits that result from that. One of the most challenging things from a development standpoint is the provision of hotfix packs to address issues that are encountered after a particular software release. And this is a very inefficient method in that the change itself might be minor, but there's a significant amount of development effort around packaging that into a delivery mechanism, which is usually a hotfix pack. By moving to a quarterly release cadence, what this allows us to do is to say, well, you know, if we have a particular fix, we don't, for the most part, need to create hotfix packs as much, because the next release is certainly going to be, you know, at most 89 days away. In terms of if we were to encounter an issue just after we ship a product, 3 months from that point, there'll be a new version coming out, and we can incorporate that particular fix into that release. Now, that doesn't mean we'll always do that, but it just means it's a much more efficient way of delivering software. 2019.1 was released on the 31st of January. It's our intention to deliver these releases at the end of the first month of a given quarter. So obviously, as I said, 2019.1 came out at the end of January. We'll be looking at bringing out the next release towards the end of April this year, and so on and so forth. Now, as I mentioned, that means that we no longer have major or minor releases. So that has a ramification for our end-of-life policy in terms of how many versions back we support. Now, historically, along with a lot of software companies, we've followed the model of supporting one major release back. But obviously now that needs to change. And let's talk a little bit about how we're changing the EOL support policy. So with the release of 2019.1, obviously you bring out a release, you're going to be unsupporting or end-of-lifing releases that go back a considerable period of time. So with the release of 2019.1, what we're doing is end-of-lifing version 4.1, which was released back in October 2016. So you can see that the lifetime of that particular release is a little over 2 years, about 2 years and 3 or 4 months. And then when we come out with 2019.2, there'll be releases that will also be end-of-life at that time, specifically 4.1.1 and 4.1.2. Now, over time, our policy will be to support a release for 2 years. And this particular table is also included in the product announcement and is covered in more detail. But the bottom line is that we will support a release from this point on for a minimum of 2 years. So, for example, 2019.1 is released in January 2019. It will be supported for 2 years. So when the release 2021.1 comes out, which will be in January 2021, at that point, the 2019.1 release would be end of life accordingly. Now you can see that obviously during this transition period, as we move away from these major and minor releases, you can see the calendar associated with when any particular release will be end of life. Now, in addition to supporting a release for 2 years, we'll be able, for the most part, to upgrade directly from any supported release to any subsequent supported release. So that means that we don't have to have a stopgap where you go on one release, but to get to another release, you have to upgrade to release A, and then from release A, you have to upgrade to B. Ideally, what you want to be able to do, and it's our intention moving forward, is to allow you to upgrade directly to release B. You don't have to use another release as a stepping stone. Okay, so let's look at some of the highlights of Transact 2019.1. So there's a number of features here, and obviously this is not an exhaustive list. What I've done is pick probably the 6 largest pieces or most important pieces. There are some others, and you'll find those in the release notes. All of this information is also summarized in the product announcement document as well. So we have upgrades and updates to existing infrastructure components. We have the ability to process eText, and I'm going to cover these in a little bit more detail. We've made some changes to the XML format for batches, and made some changes both in terms of the format and also the maintainability of that XML document. Expedite Export is a feature that's of particular interest to a lot of customers that I've spoken to, which allows us to expedite documents that have been processed, but they're kind of held up in the system because there are other documents in the same batch that have yet to be completed. We've made some changes to the reporting infrastructure, and also we've actually focused some enhancements as regards machine learning. So let's actually start off by looking at some of the updates that we've made. The purpose of doing all this is to really keep current with the latest and greatest versions of the underlying componentry that forms part of Transact. And that's important both in terms of maximizing performance, but also at the same time, mitigating any potential threat vulnerabilities. Now, these components fall into a number of categories. In this particular release, there are no operating system changes, so there's no new operating systems we're supporting, but there are changes to both databases, to OCR engines, and to some of the other componentry as well. So from a database standpoint, we're supporting MariaDB version 10.3.8. We're also end-of-lifing MySQL, and we've upgraded the OCR engine to RecoStar 7.8. Other components that have changed: GhostScript, we now support 9.25. Logi Analytics is a version 12.5.216 Service Pack 5. Spring 4.318, and LibreOffice 6.1. By the way, if any of you do have any questions, there is a Q&A feature. You're not able to speak, unfortunately, but if you want to raise a question, feel free to do so. And if I'm not able to answer it during the webinar, we're actually going to create a document that will summarize the questions and the appropriate answers to those questions, and that will be provided to you as a follow-up along with a recording of this webinar. So, the key thing here is we're doing updates and upgrades to the infrastructure that really ensures that we leverage the latest available technology. We're maintaining optimal threat mitigation and delivering the best possible performance. So next, we'll move on to talk about eText processing. And what this really does is leverage the text layers that are present in some, not all, programmatically generated PDFs. So when I create a document, as I often do in Word, I create the document in Word, I type the text in, all the text in that Word document is digitized. And then when I go create the PDF, it's gonna render some kind of viewable image, but at the same time, it's gonna leverage that text, if I've configured it to do so, and actually create a layer of text so that I can do things like searching, I can do cut and paste of text and so forth within that document inside of the PDF itself. Now, the key thing about this is that the eText layer is a 100% accurate representation of the text on the page. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for us to OCR that page, because we're never going to improve on its accuracy. And the key thing to remember here is this is not about performance of the system, this is about the accuracy of the system. So if we look at how we create a PDF, we have a Word document, and obviously we're going to go create the PDF itself, but also underneath that there is also this eText layer. Now, the thing to remember about an eText layer is it is a layer of each page in the PDF. It's not a document that there's a PDF document and an eText document. These relate to individual pages because indeed a PDF may be made up of one or more PDFs. So you might have, for example, a multi-page document. Some pages have eText layers, some do not, because maybe they're an amalgam of multiple PDFs that were created in different ways. So from an eText processing standpoint, what we're looking at is having the ability to look at a document and say, there are, in this particular instance, 4 pages. The 4 pages that we have, pages 2 and 4 actually have eText layers associated with them. Pages 1 and 3 do not. So when we process that document, what we're actually going to see is, in fact, that two of the pages are processed 100% accurately because we've got the text already from the eText layer. So we're leveraging that. So we're only going to OCR those pages that require OCR in the sense that they don't have an eText layer associated with them. So eText processing is about increasing the accuracy of the text extraction. It's minimizing the amount of manual intervention because I'm not having to go in and correct things due to a less than 100% accuracy because I already have the text already. So therefore, it's always going to be 100% correct. Therefore, those pages will not require anyone from a manual standpoint to say, yes, this text is correctly been OCR'd. I see a question from a couple of questions here. So it says, do we still support MS SQL? We have end-of-life support for MySQL, but we've made no other changes to the database. So the only changes that I referred to on that slide are the changes that we've made. The next question is, does the eText processing only pertain to Word documents or scanned documents able to use the eText method? Well, the issue is whether there is a text layer inside of the PDF. So if a document has been scanned, it's unlikely, unless it's been OCR'd by something else, to have an eText layer associated with it. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is batch completion pop-up. Now what that is, we have a number of customers that do centralized scanning, and this is really geared towards kind of very high volume environments where you actually have a dedicated scanner operator as opposed to ingesting documents through email or very transactionally through a mobile device or an MFP in a regionally dispersed environment. So if we have customers who are doing large volumes of scanning, and what they want to be able to do for the scanner operators is to create a log of what's been scanned. So they want to be able to write down, either that's entering into an application or actually even into a physical journal saying, okay, I scanned, here's the batch ID, here's the instance name, here's the description, and here's how many pages were actually captured. So what we've done with this is we've actually made a configurable pop-up so that if we actually complete the scanning, we're going to pop this information up so that it's easily accessible for the scanner operator. And that does a couple of things. It minimizes the time it takes for them to actually go and find this information. And if that's the case, then once we've got that information, we can make it easily available. They're not going to make mistakes. They're not going to spend time looking for it. And it's going to speed up that process. So in this particular instance, scanner operators have easy access to the information. This improves productivity, it reduces compliance costs, and just generally makes the environment that much easier to use for the scanner operator. Okay, so we've made some additional changes to the BATCH.XML. One of the most important changes, although it's not easy to kind of show on the screen, is that we've aligned the XSD with the XML. Now, what does that mean? It means that if we make a change to the configuration, so if, for example, we change the configuration of Transact to now accept documents coming in via email, what we don't want to do is have that then subsequently modify the XML to the point where applications can't use it. So we want to make sure that the XML maintains support even if you make changes to the configuration of the underlying system. So it's all about XML maintainability. The other changes that we've made are around providing some additional data inside of the XML itself. So for example, now we can track who has reviewed a particular document, who has validated a particular document. We've got information around the origin of the document in terms of the source file information. And in the case where documents have come in via email, we've also got some metadata associated with that email system as well. So the key thing here is about enhancing the maintainability, providing additional metadata during the processing of batches. And this is all about reducing total cost of ownership, increasing process visibility and auditability. Okay, let's talk about Expedite Export. And this is all about accelerating the processing of documents. Imagine we have a set of documents that are being processed, and for whatever reason, we've got some documents that have already been processed. Either they were processed fine, completely autonomously by the system, but obviously the batch has been sent to a human user because there are some documents in that batch requiring attention. Or it could be that the user themselves has actually processed a number of documents. But the problem is, without any kind of expediting of those documents are kind of chained together. They're handcuffed, and it means that the document can't move down through the workflow because they're waiting for these other documents to be processed. So what Expedite Export allows the user to do is to select documents that they can say, okay, we're done with these. They can move on, and we can either select an individual document, we can select a multiple document, or we can select all documents that are ready for export. So in the Transact UI, these would be things that are highlighted in green as opposed to red. And as of right now, in the particular release that we're talking about, which is 2019.1, this is something that a user has to do. So they are in the environment, they select the documents they want to expedite, they hit the button, and what that does, it splits the batch in two. It splits the batch into those documents that have been selected and those documents that haven't been selected. And then the ones that have been selected that are available and ready to go on to the next step, which in most cases would be an export, then those will go off and be processed, leaving the ones that require manual attention to basically be processed. And this can be done multiple times. So I can select multiple documents, send those off, I can complete some more, send those off, and so on. Now, you might ask, well, why would you want to keep things around if they've been processed? Well, there could well be use cases where you've got documents that are interrelated and you don't want the one document to go off without another document which is relevant. So in the case of a loan application, for example, I might have automatically processed someone's tax return, W-2, but I haven't completed the form, the application form that goes along with that. So again, you give the user discretion to be able to do that. We are planning in a future release to make that programmatic. And again, this is done on a batch class by batch class basis. So if we look at what that looks like, here we see a batch of 4 documents, 2 of which have been completely processed. So we can actually select those and off they go. We can select them individually, or say go process all the ones that have been processed. So we've split the batch to a two document batch has gone off to export, and 2 other documents remain in the batch requiring user interaction. So the key thing here is that Expedite Export ensures greater flexibility in processing priority, enabling the export of documents at the earliest opportunity, again, down to operator discretion. This improves performance and also helps realize the meeting of service level agreements. All right, let's look at reporting design changes. We've done quite a bit here. A lot of it isn't necessarily apparent, but the key thing is we wanted to improve the reliability, stability, and performance of the underlying reporting infrastructure. So here, what we've done is we've abstracted the reporting database. So rather than go at the Ephesoft application database, we've abstracted all the data into a reporting database. And then any applications that are doing a reporting are going at that database and not at the core application database. And that has obviously significant benefits, because what you don't want to do is to drive down the performance of the system by doing reporting. Reporting should be completely divorced from that. So what we've done is we've improved the data flow and the calculations and the way that we collect data. We've implemented views for creating more sophisticated and reporting that's not going to actually create a whole bunch of complex queries. And simplified the control and management of that reporting database. So the changes here to the infrastructure are really about enhancing the capabilities and performance of the collection and the presentation of the data. This is about elevating the visibility of the processes managed by Ephesoft Transact and not having a detrimental impact on their performance if you're doing any significant reporting. Okay, on to the last major topic for Transact 2019.1. Here, what we've done with machine learning is really, we took what we've done and actually focused it on one of the most prevalent use cases initially, which is the one of invoice processing. We're supporting 3 languages. We're focusing on processing invoices specifically about the dozen or so header information fields. So this is like invoice date, invoice number, vendor name, vendor ID, and so on. About pulling that information and doing as much of that out of the box as possible. We create synonyms associated with each of these fields, and that's stored in a properties file. And the way that we do machine learning is controlled at the batch class level. Now, in terms of the underlying core algorithm, so this is what ultimately comes shipped with the product. What we wanted to be able to do is really drive improvements in accuracy. So the previous implementation, we did some testing on 4.5, and we got about 46% accuracy in terms of the processing of invoices. Now, with the new version, we've seen a significant improvement. It's about 88% accurate. With French and German, it's a little less. There are a number of reasons for that, but that's something that we're looking to strive to continually improve and enhance the capabilities to get as much accuracy out of the box as possible. Now, in addition to that, what we've also done is created this, what we call the enhanced machine learning plugin. And what this does is says, okay, fine, I've got a certain level of learning that I have, but obviously it's not going to be 100%, so it's going to send certain invoices to users to be processed. What I don't want to do is have those users continually do the same changes over and over again. So for example, if I have a particular vendor that does things really kind of weird and the system just isn't able to cope with that, what I want to be able to do is have the user identify the information that I'm looking for, and then those corrections to directly influence the machine learning model to ultimately make the brain smarter. So whether it's a vendor that has really weird invoices, or it's a new vendor, or it's an existing vendor who's made changes to their invoice layout, we want to be able to automatically incorporate the corrective action and create these regular expressions to represent that corrective action, ultimately reducing the amount of repetitive operative changes that are necessary. So it's all about maximizing the level of automation. This works in tandem with the core machine learning algorithm to continually improve the accuracy that's being delivered as part of this solution. So the invoice-focused machine learning is about reducing both the implementation time and also the total cost of ownership, reducing the amount of manual involvement by the user. So when a user actually makes a change, it's not only fixing that one invoice, but it's making the system smarter to be able to automate a higher proportion of the invoices flowing through the system. Okay, so let's move on now to the Cloud HyperExtender. The Cloud HyperExtender is all about taking certain amount of processor-centric functionality. Now, if you look at the way that Transact processes documents, you've got this typically a 5-step process. You capture the document, you OCR the information based upon the layout and the text, you classify that document, you then go and extract the information you're looking for, and then export that information and along with the document to some destination. Well, the key thing to realize here is that there is a significant amount of CPU activity just in one of those 5 functions. About 75% on average is done as OCR. So if you see a sudden degradation in performance because you load a bunch of documents into the system, it's all most likely the OCR that's going to be the problem. And that's just a consequence of the way that OCR is. It's a very CPU intensive activity. But it's also an activity that doesn't really require a lot of, if any, human intervention, because you give it documents, it gives you back text, and then you do stuff with it. But that actual box doesn't really require any human intervention. So what the Cloud HyperExtender does is to say, well, let's take that functionality and let's elevate that into the cloud. so that now what we want to be able to do is provide the documents to that OCR capability and have it provide us back with the data that we need for the subsequent steps in the process. So let's look at what that means in a demo. Now, I'm not doing a live demo here because there are certain elements which I'm actually going to speed up and fast forward. But what we can see in this demonstration is processing a pretty large number of documents and how quickly it is able to do that. So let's look at the demo. So in this particular demo, what we see is a total of about 46 pages in a single batch, and there are 50 batches that we're actually going to process. And we can see them here. So I'm going to drag those documents into a watch folder, and then I'm going to start a clock down on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, so you can see the elapsed time, and that's going to speed up later on. So we can see that it's starting to create the necessary batches inside of Transact, and if I actually refresh, we can see that we've already created 10. As we continue to hit refresh, we can see that that number is going to go up, and ultimately we're going to get to 50. So now we've got 20, 30. We have a total of 50 batches that we're going through. Now I'm speeding up the clock here so that we can see it go through. So for example, we're about 1 minute 45 seconds, 152.41 seconds. So that was under 2 minutes to basically process, from an OCR standpoint, 50 batches of 46 pages. So that's actually a very impressive number. And we'll come on to what we actually saw right now. So let me just move on to the next page. So what did we actually see? Well, we saw 50 46-page batches, and that's 2,300 pages. So when you think about that, and you're in Costco and you see those big bricks of paper, that's about just over 4.5 of those bricks of paper. If you actually pick that up, that would be pretty heavy. And we actually processed that in 1 minute and 52 seconds. Now that's a pretty impressive number, because what it means is, and if we were actually to compare this, if we took an 8-core Transact system, and we did, and we ran this through, what we ended up getting was about 50 pages per minute. Now with Cloud HyperExtender, that number was dramatically higher. It was a huge improvement. So we actually got about 1,232 pages. That's what you saw. And what you saw me processing there was all that OCR activity was happening in the cloud. That represents a very significant improvement. We typically see anywhere between 1,000, in this particular instance, a very large improvement of almost 2,400% improvement. So one of the biggest concerns about anything in the cloud is security. So for example, with the security, I'm concerned with, okay, if I'm putting documents out there, what about security? Well, first of all, how do we protect the data at rest? Information that's stored is dedicated and segregated in buckets for each customer in a specific region. So we're having a multi-tenanted infrastructure, but we've got dedicated and segregated buckets for each customer. And you can determine in which region. Now we're rolling this out gradually. So right now we're rolling it out in North America. When we roll it out in other regions, those physical servers that are running the cloud infrastructure will be located in country. Now, so on the server side, the bucket's encrypted with managed keys by default. In addition to that, what about the data moving to and from? So again, we're using HTTPS endpoint protection to prevent attacks on the data as it transits to and is received from the cloud. We're using secure API keys, AES 256-bit encrypted keys, and also we're purging both the input and output buckets within 24 hours, so no information is left lurking on a server any longer than it has to. Also, for future releases, we're looking at providing the ability for customers to use their own encryption keys. That's not available right now, but that is something that's currently planned. And we as an organization take security very seriously. So again, we're SOC 2 Type 1 compliant. We've completed our Type 1 audit, and our Type 2 audit is currently in process. So why use the Cloud HyperExtender? Well, from a performance standpoint, first of all. So if you're an organization that has a continuous, very high volume of demand, this is going to provide you a very cost-effective way of improving the performance of the existing system. So if you have a high level of continuous demand placed upon your system, the Cloud HyperExtender represents an excellent opportunity. Particularly applicable if you're dealing with demands that are highly variable. So if you're in the insurance claims industry, and in response to a catastrophe, you see a huge spike in demand. If you're in the retail sector and you see a huge spike in demand around sort of November to January, you could buy a very, very large server that will provide you the adequate level of performance in response to that demand. But then you'd have to recognize the fact that that system's going to be sitting almost idle for a significant amount of time. What the Cloud HyperExtender allows you to do with a flip of a switch is to turn on all of this extra capacity that you have available. Now, the way that you pay for that is different from the way that you license Transact. We do it on a volume basis. So you basically provide a subscription payment which says, I want to have the capacity to process this number of pages. And that is a subscription that will last over a 12-month period. If you then renew that subscription with something either equal or to the higher, you extend the existing subscription for any unused capacity into that next subscription period. There's multiple ways. So, for example, the demo I gave was actually using a cloud-based instance of Transact talking to the Cloud HyperExtender. That's certainly one way. Another way would be to use Transact on-premise as well. So either way, whether you're deployed on-prem or in the cloud, you can still leverage the Cloud HyperExtender. And as I mentioned, you also have the ability to take advantage of the various security safeguards that we've built into the Cloud HyperExtender. Now, I do have a question actually relating back to machine learning. I just wanted to answer that. So can we add our own synonyms to the property files to help with invoices my company receives? Yes, you could do that, but also don't forget the enhanced plugin will automatically create regular expressions to deal with invoices that perhaps aren't processed automatically in the first instance. So the Cloud HyperExtender, as I mentioned, is about seamlessly integrating cloud capacity with both new and existing on-prem and cloud deployments. It's about delivering consistent performance at times of peak demand while minimizing upfront investment. So whether you're an existing customer, whether you're a new customer that's looking to deploy, whether you're an on-prem customer, whether you're a cloud-based customer, whether you're a customer that has high volume of demand all the time, or whether you only have high volume some of the time, Cloud HyperExtender offers significant value. To summarize, as I mentioned before, we're moving to a quarterly release cadence. That cadence is now quarterly, and as a consequence, there are changes to the end-of-life policy and support policies for prior versions. All of that information is contained within the product announcement. It's also on various other places as well. If you have any questions, either talk to your Ephesoft partner, or if you're a direct customer, talk to ourselves directly. Transact 2019.1 was released on January 31st. It's the first of the quarterly release cadence. The next one will be coming along in the sort of end of April timeframe. And as I mentioned, Cloud HyperExtender was released at the same time. Cloud HyperExtender does require 2019.1. So if you're looking to leverage Cloud HyperExtender, bear in mind that you need to be on version 2019.1 in order for that to be available to you. There's not any software that has to be downloaded. It's something that's part of a registration process within the product. And obviously there is a license for the Cloud HyperExtender, which is based on a page volume license, which is a 12-month subscription. More information regarding pricing can be available from your partners and indeed from ourselves as well.